Hello, everybody. I was just doing some exercising while the countdown was happening, and here we are live again. I'm Darlene with Digital Photo Mentor, and this is our weekly photo editing live stream. As you can see by my screen, I think it's over there. Just a reminder to please submit photos. We're looking for lots of photos on different themes. I have a few with water as the theme, so rivers, lakes, ocean, and so on. We'd love to get a few more of those. I'd love to get your images that you'd like to turn into black and white. Let's give that a go. And I think we talked about pets and animals as well as people portraits. So use the form below the video, or Rob's going to put it in the chat to submit your images for next week and future weeks. And just a reminder that all of the images that I'm going to be editing today are submitted by people who are just like you watching the live stream. So this is a value for everybody to learn as to how I approach photo editing on each image, what I decide to do to it, and why. And then you can take that knowledge and apply it to your images. And if I choose one of your images to edit today, your homework is to try and replicate what I've done with your image using your software of choice. Speaking of software, I use a combination of Lightroom Classic, Photoshop, and currently Luminar AI, right? There is a big holiday sale on at Skylum right now, and Rob can probably drop a link to that in the chat as well. So if you are interested in getting Luminar AI or picking up Neo and AI and Aurora as well, they've got some big savings on that. And just a quick mention that I'm also doing an HDR photography workshop tomorrow. So I'm not sure if Rob can grab the link for that. I can grab that and put that in the chat for you if you aren't already signed up. It's a free webinar. All you have to do is enter your email and you'll get a copy of the raw files that I'm going to demonstrate so that you can follow along and learn about HDR photography. I've got the link for the webinar there. There we go. All right, so I'm going to get some images on my screen. Grab yourself a beverage, and I'll be back in 2 shakes of a lamb's tail. All right. I do have some images as promised. There we go. And I know we probably have some regulars in the house that are attending every week. Let's see. Of course, Ron, 24 degrees. Well, that's a lot warmer than it is here, Ron. I think we're about minus 24. You could probably confirm, Rob, but we're on the other end of the scale, on the spectrum of temperature, and on the other side of the planet. So that's what it looks like here. Also from Adelaide, you guys are going into summer, and we are going into the depths of winter. Welcome, Linton and Ron, as usual. And there's the links to the submitting the photos and the webinar in the chat for you. Deb in Alaska, awesome. And yes, Rob has confirmed that it is indeed minus 24 today. He was out and about, so he can definitely confirm. Rita from Manitoba, and I think one of those images is yours today, Rita. If not, I could go and grab one. Yes, I've got the one of the window for you. I'm hanging on to your floral images and some of the others because I'm trying to, the icicle one that you submit, trying to get a set of water themed images, and then I can do them all together. So these are the ones I'm going to work on today. We'll see how many of these we get through. I've got Trish's of the old antique car as well, and usually Anne pops in, so I'll save hers for a little bit later. So I'm going to get started on Rita's because she's here. Usually AJ and Stephanie will show up as well, so hopefully we'll see them soon. Okay, so remind me, Rita, if you are using Lightroom or Luminar, or what are you using to do your images? It's been a while since I looked at the form because I can demonstrate in either software or both if you want me to show you how to do it using the software that you use, right? So again, keep in mind, I'm using a combination of Lightroom and Luminar, but for the most part, they can do the same thing in terms of correction of distortion that we're seeing here. Hi, Stephanie. I knew you'd be coming. Okay, let me see if I can find Rita's. She's using Luminar AI. Okay, so what I think I'm going to do then is I'm going to show both, because there are people doing Lightroom and people using Luminar. So the question that she had about this image was how to straighten it, right? So the window looks kind of, cockeyed. So this happens for a number of different reasons. If you're using a wide lens, you'll get perspective. So I'm just going to make myself slightly bigger. You'll get perspective so that when you're looking up, your buildings will be converging, right? If you have a wide lens. If you're shooting sort of off kilter and looking to sideways, so it means if you're not exactly in the middle of that window, it's going to look skewed this way, right? So if you're off to the side and you're looking up, that's what's happening here. Okay, so we've got some distortions going both ways, right? So to fix this, we could do a number of things in the crop tool, and I've demonstrated that a lot last week. So we could try and correct for the tilt. Okay, so that sort of corrects. Okay, it's looking like it's straight up and down now. I'm going to leave it there, and let's just say that's correct. The other thing you can do is go down into transform, because this is where your distortion corrections happen. Okay, level is what I just did with the crop tool, and it should do the same thing. Okay, it corrected a little bit more. I'm not so sure I'm happy with that one, so I'm just going to undo. Vertical should correct the tilting. Okay, full gives us everything, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start with auto and see how close we get. All right, so look at that. If I bring up the crop tool again and I'm just clicking anywhere and holding my mouse down, and I get this grid. Okay, if I don't get the grid, I can also just click O, and it scrolls through different grid views. So I can just keep going until I get that. And what I'm looking for is, is this line straight? Now let's just see if I straighten it to that line. Now, is this line straight? No, now this one's not straight. Okay, so something's not right. Okay, so something's still off kilter. So I'm going to do off, and I'm going to try full. Actually, I'm going to reset the crop as well. So I'm going to try full, and let's see what that does. Okay, so I'm looking for all four of these lines when I straighten it. Okay, now the vertical here looks pretty good. This one looks pretty good. That's better. So it's still not quite. Like if I line up this left one, this one is off, right? So you can see that. And now if I line up the bottom, then the top is off. So something is not quite right, right? When you have a one like this that is a bit more complicated, there's a guided option here. Okay, so guided, what it allows me to do is literally draw lines. Okay, so I can tell it, okay, I want these to be vertical, and I want these to be straight horizontal. Okay, now look. So when I hit enter or escape, pardon me, now when I look at the crop tool, all of those axes, all of the window is straight. Okay, so this is a perfect example of when that guided option is a really great choice to use, because it allowed me to draw those lines around the window. Looks like it's crooked now. Oops. Let's just straighten that bottom one. Well, it looks pretty good. Okay, that's about as straight as we're going to get. Okay, so crooked, straight. Now let's see if I can do the same thing in Luminar. So I'm just going to reset it, and I'm going to open this in Luminar. I'm just going to use a JPEG for this purpose because we just want to correct the tilt. And once I've got the tilt corrected, we can also play with, of course, the contrast and everything else. That's a new one for you, Linton. Awesome. So regardless of what software you're using, most of them will have some form of distortion correction or distortion control. Okay, you'll also notice that there's these sliders here in Lightroom, and I can do this manually as well. So if I reset this one, so for example, if I do vertical, it's going to try and adjust that vertical, right? Make sure you click constrain crop. I can try and rotate so I get that bottom. Let's get that bottom straight. Right. horizontal, right? See, is like this. So it takes a lot more playing around to do it that way, but you can do it manually versus, of course, where I just did one button, right? Or the guided, right? So full got me close. Guided did a better job. All right, now I've got Luminar open over on this other window. Let me just get it over here. Now, if you have pre-ordered Neo, they have now said that I believe it says on the website coming at the end of February or April. So depending on if you got the early bird order, you may be getting it a bit sooner. I will be getting a sneak peek probably in the next week or so. So stay tuned. I will probably have a video on that. All right, so for Luminar, you're going to be down here under the Professional tab, under Optics, right? And I'm going to, oops, where am I looking at? Nope, I'm going to do Optics for Defringe, sorry. And then they moved it to Composition. And Composition has automatic. So if I click automatic, it's going to tell me what it thinks it should do. So let's just do that. So it's cropped. Okay, that's okay, but not perfect. Let's try this one here. So there's tilt, okay, so perspective corrections, and then this one, which is tilt that way, right? Now I might try this one again. So it's not doing as good a job vertically, so I can also do that this way as I did in Photoshop, right? So I can try and get these things a little more evenly aligned. Let's try it manually. Okay, so we want to make that side bigger. We want to make the top bigger. We want to straighten it and correct the distortion. Now we've kind of made a big mess, right? Let's check all the lines. Yeah, not quite correct on the top. So we'll maybe go a little more, oops, a little more on this guy. Takes a little more playing around. But you can see I'm looking at sort of the top lines there and all the way around. That looks pretty close. Okay, so let's hit enter. Looks a little more distorted to me than I would like to see. And I lost some of the bottom. So let's see how that compares to what we got in Lightroom. Right? But that's the tools that you're going to find. It's under the composition tool, Rita, and that's where you want to look for that one. Okay. All right, let's compare. So I've got the one I did in Lightroom on the left and the one I did in Luminar on the right. So in this case, Lightroom did a slightly better job, I think. But if I played around with those sliders a bit more in Luminar, I think I could probably get closer. You can see that it's definitely done a better job if we look at the original, which is really tilted, right? Both of the Lightroom and the Luminar versions are better than the original in terms of correction, right? So if I want to now continue my editing, as usual, I'm going to look at the camera profile. I might even look at something punchier in this case. So landscape makes it a little bit yellow. I'm going to go neutral on this one. I'm going to do my usual double click on the whites and the blacks. And in this case, I don't mind clipping this little bit of sky up here because I'd rather get more white sort of everywhere else and get some contrast. Now, a subject like this, I've talked about not going too far with clarity in the past, but a subject like this, I would actually take this one quite a bit farther because there is so much texture in this one, right? I will put an edge vignette on this one, probably something fairly dark. I'm just using one of my Lightroom presets. Rob can pop that into the chat. So the Lightroom presets that I've designed are basic things like develops for portraits, settings for import, and a few different vignettes, right? Including some white ones. So if you want to add a lighter colored vignette, you can do that. I'm not usually a fan of something like, for example, what's called selective coloring. But let's see what we can do with masking on this one in terms of selecting the subject. Let's see what Lightroom picks for us. if it could find the subject. Perfect. Okay, now look what happened. It found the inside of the window. Okay, so now we can really punch the texture and the contrast in the window, and then we can do basically copy this one. Okay, I'm going to copy it and then invert it. And then I'm going to go the opposite way on the clarity and texture on the outside and even darken it. Okay. The other thing that I could do is actually desaturate the outside or lower the saturation quite a bit so that it also draws the eye more into the center. Okay. Because remember when I talked about the four things, often the four things that your eye will be drawn to, right? So I haven't really played with this one in previous tutorials, but I'm looking for my thing there. There it is. Okay, so the four things that will grab your attention are brightness, sharpness, contrast, and color, right? So if we take away the color from the outside and we take away the sharpness, your eye's going to go more towards the center, okay? So now I'm really sort of hazing it out with minus clarity, minus saturation, minus sharpness, and I could really darken it down as well. Add some blacks. Okay. One thing I talked about, actually I had a tutoring session this week with my student Regan, and we talked about using these kinds of adjustments. Make sure that you don't do just one, like exposure, okay, or just shadows. Make sure that you manage to maintain contrast in the area that you are applying it to. In this case, we're applying it to the outside, right? Because if I just do minus exposure, it's sort of excuse me. Sorry, I got a tickle in my throat, always from talking. Get my cough out. Okay, so when you just do exposure like this, it kind of gets flat, okay? So I added a little bit of black back in, right? So I can keep that contrast even in the outside, but I'll just keep it darker, right? Let me get this guy off the screen. Okay, so let's see what let's turn this on and off. Okay, so let's see what the masks are doing. Okay. Kind of cool, right? So that worked out really well, that it chose the subject almost perfectly. Okay, so we've gone from that to something like that. Right. As I said, I'm not a huge fan of selective coloring or that kind of thing. But in this case, it works really well. And I could even add more saturation to the center, like so. We could also play with those inside the HSL panel. And let's just say, okay, we want to saturate this. Now we can see that that's orange. And I want to, and what I did was I clicked on this little targeted adjustment tool, and then it gives me this little crosshairs thing. So wherever I click and drag, that's the colors it's affecting, right? So you can see that's yellow and green, right? Now it is affecting the outside as well, but it's still a lot more muted because I've got that dialed down in the mask, right? So let's play with that. That was kind of cool. I'd love to know where you photographed this, Rita. It's a very interesting subject. Of course, photographers are drawn to things that are falling down and crumbling, right? All right, let's see. So I'd love to know what you did with it, Rita, and let us know where you photographed this in the chat. It's a really interesting subject. Very cool. I'm glad you like the edit. Is this something in Winnipeg? I know that there was, I haven't been to Winnipeg for years, but I know there was some old ruins and things that a lot of photographers use there as like wedding photos and stuff. All right, let's see what else we've got. Okay, Stephanie's here. I do have one of your images, I think. Yes, the grapes. Okay, so let's do that. I always like to do the ones for the people that are here so that I can reward you for joining me every week. Do we have anybody new joining us? If you're watching for the first time, just introduce yourself in the chat and let us know where you're joining from. We love to be like a little close-knit family here. Okay, so let's take a look at Stephanie's grapes. Okay, so as per usual, I'm going to start with the camera profile. Okay. In this case, I'm going to look at, okay, portrait kind of gives me some nice greens, neutral, faithful, landscape. Landscape really brings out the green, doesn't it? So I think I'm going to go with landscape, but I want to make sure that those grapes stand out more than the leaves. Okay. So we're going to do a few things to help that happen. I'm going to crop it a little bit. Okay. And part of what I want to do with cropping, I'm going to keep the aspect ratio the same, but I really want to get closer up on this grape bundle here. Okay. And have sort of less of this stuff over on the side. Okay. Now this pipe in the middle is bugging me, but we're gonna do a trick on that pipe. Okay. If you were watching last week, I talked about using the clone tool, and Lightroom's clone tool is not the greatest. We know that. But I'm going to use the clone tool. Let me just see how big my brush is here. And I'm going to show you a little trick because I'm going to just kind of paint next to this pipe here because it's really the top of the pipe that's bugging me so much. And I'm just going to like move it around until I kind of see something that looks like it sort of fits in. And I'm trying to make it look like there's a leaf there. Okay. And you can also lower the opacity a little bit. No, that doesn't work. So I'm just sort of moving it around and looking for something that blends. I'm going to try again. I'm going to do just that part. Okay, so now it's chosen to put a crumpled up leaf, which I'm not really crazy about. We want something maybe with a, oh, that looks good. So look how I'm using the branch or the stick to match up with the other branch. Okay, and let's try more of a feather. That works. Okay, so less feather is a sharper edge. Remember, less feather is a sharper edge. More feather, it blends more. Okay, so it seems to look really blended, right? So if I didn't tell you that I had put that there, you might not figure it out on your own. Okay, so I'm going to dial the feather down a little bit because that seemed to work better. And it looks like this leaf is coming from there. Okay, so that's a kind of a little trick. So I didn't have to do major Photoshop or major cloning, right? And we got rid of that guy. Now let's see what Photoshop or what Lightroom thinks is the subject, right? I think I tried this one already for sky and it wasn't able to pick it out. But look, it picked out the grapes pretty nicely, okay? Now it looks like it missed part of them up here. Okay, so if I want to add a little bit more, I can just click on the mask down here where it says add. And I'm going to do a radial gradient. So I'm going to draw a circle or an oval around the bits that I want to add. Okay, so I just want to add a little bit more of the leaves and these grapes up here. Okay, so now that's our mask. Okay, now what am I going to do to the grapes? Well, I definitely want to add texture. So all of those things that we talked about not wanting in your background, right? So contrast, sharpness, color, and contrast, all of those things you do want in your subject. Okay, so let's work on that. I could bring the whites up. Okay, so see how the whites, remember overall when I increase whites and blacks, it does a really good job of increasing contrast on the whole image. Well, the same thing applies when you're doing an area like this. Okay, I'm going to do a second mask. I'm basically going to just duplicate this. And then I'm going to invert the subject and invert the radial gradient. Okay, so now you can see that I've got the opposite chosen. Now it's still got, looks like it's still got part of my subject. Okay, so I want to subtract the subject. And it's better. Right? I'm still going to subtract a bit more and just make sure that I'm not getting any of this bit or any of this bit. So I'm just using the brush now. I'm painting out these parts. And with this mask, I want to do the opposite. So I want to darken it a bit. I want to bring the highlights down. And I definitely want to sort of darken the overall. think I'm going to warm it up a little bit so the leaves look a little warmer too. We can play with that in HSL. So how's that? The grapes are standing out. Pipe's not standing out so much. Okay. Let's check my overall. Okay, so there are areas clipping, but they're in the background and they're very bright and blown out. So I'm not going to worry about that because I really don't care about that highlight up in this corner here. Checking the blacks. Okay. Let's have a look for chromatic aberration. Yes, we have some. Okay, so do you see what I'm seeing here? When I zoom into 200%, it's this little purple fringe, right? And you'll find that under the lens corrections, right? If you're shooting a Fuji like me, this is applied for you automatically. If you're not, you can click on this button here and it literally will remove the chromatic aberration. You can try the camera profile or the lens profile. See, it even recognizes the lens that you are using here, Stephanie. And you can go farther because now I'm seeing what's called a fringe, okay? And there's a defringe tool here, eyedropper, click the eyedropper. And you literally just kind of hover over the area that has the fringe, click on it, see how that went away? Now let's see if I can do the same here. Okay, look at that. So by dragging it higher, it selected the color for me, and now I can just get rid of the fringe. Okay, so look at the difference. And it also tends to make your image look sharper. Okay, now I've zoomed in this much, we're seeing that there's a lot of noise, of course. Right? So we can fix that with some noise reduction. So again, I have noise reduction built into Lightroom presets as well. You'll see noise living in the darker areas of your picture more so than the light areas. So look at this branch versus here. Okay. Rob, please share the article I did on the noise reduction comparison of software. So noise is caused by 3 different things, okay? Everybody automatically assumes high ISO, which is correct, but it also comes from long exposure. So if you're doing a 1 second or longer exposure, you'll get some noise. It also comes from if your image is really underexposed and you push it too far, you'll get noise. In many cases, if you're trying to use a lower ISO and you get an underexposed image and then you crank it up later in processing, it'll actually be noisier or grainier than if you just shot with a higher ISO to begin with, okay? So don't shoot yourself in the foot by underexposing on purpose. So I've got some more noise reduction tools in my presets. So I'm going to click on medium noise reduction and sharpen landscape, maybe medium. So now keep in mind that if I do a lot of sharpening, you get this artifacting, okay? So I tend to keep sharpening low and I tend to keep luminance low. And you can see those under the detail panel, because if you go too far, you're going to just get a big blob. The other thing I've done with my portrait sharpening, okay, is I've done a mask. Okay? We talked about a mask in the previous session, or if you hold the Alt or Option key down on your keyboard and click the mask, what you're seeing here, right, is the parts that are being sharpened, right? When it's all white, everything's being sharpened. Here, it's only sharpening the outlines. The benefit of that is that when I do that, it's not actually sharpening the noise, right? Can you see that? So when I change the sharpening, look at the difference when I have no mask versus masking. Okay, so it kind of takes it off the smoother areas of your image. Okay, so always make sure you're using the masking on the sharpening tool. Let's go play with HSL on this one. And I think I want to tone down these leaves a bit more and make them a little darker. So I'm just going to click and drag. And do that here. And we could actually go 2 different ways. I could actually brighten the yellow, which I often do, and darken the green. So let's just take it to an extreme. Now that's actually sort of done really nicely around the grapes because it's highlighted them, right? And if I want to brighten these grapes, it's not really picking up the color. So it's not really picking up purple. I can try the slider. Okay, that's good. That helps. And let's try a little more blue in the grapes. And let's make them a little more purple. There we go. So all of those things are happening with the HSL tool. Okay. Another way I could go is actually to make it sort of more high key and lighten the yellows and the greens. I think I'm going to give them a bit more fall color look as well. Okay. And when I do a vignette on this one, we could actually try like a lighter vignette, like that. So when you're dealing with contrast, it works both ways. So if the subject is the darkest thing in the picture, it's going to stand out because of contrast. If it is the lightest and the edges are dark, it's going to stand out as well, right? So if I go this route, because there's two ways to go with this image, right? If I go this route, I actually might add a mask here. And let's do a radial gradient. And I'm just going to brighten up the dark areas here. So I'm just going to brighten the shadows. And I find that when I lower clarity and dehaze, it's too much. When I lower the clarity, it tends to brighten the shadows as well. It lowers the contrast. Okay, that looks pretty good. Because I'm trying to get these darks in the grapes behind there not so bright. That looks better. All right. Let's see a before and after. So we fixed up that pipe, made the grape stand out, right? I'm going to pull this one into Luminar because I think there's some really cool things in Luminar that I can add to give it some enhancements in terms of style, right? So I often use Luminar as my finishing touch. Where's my sRGB? Just to add some things like demystify, which is my favorite tool there. So Rita's telling us about the location for her funky window. Leech call. Oh, I've heard of that. Yeah, Collieries. I'm not even sure how to pronounce that. Southwest Alberta near Crow's Nest. Yeah, I've heard of that one actually. Some of our camera clubs from here have actually made trips there, I think, as well. All right, so I've got this guy open in Luminar. And this is Luminar AI, just so you're clear on which version I'm using. And I'm going to go into my favorite templates to just see some of the ones that I know that I like and how they look. I'm not finding one that's grabbing me. So let's see what Luminar is suggesting. Okay, it's suggesting objects. Okay, so it knows it's an object. So we could go extra sharp on this one. That one's kind of cool. Okay, I like what it's doing to the grapes there, and I'll show you how to fix it. So if we don't like what it's doing around the rest, okay? So I'm just going to turn off each tool and see what this tool is doing, because what I could do is actually mask it so that it's only applying to the grapes. Right, now it's the opposite right now, but I'm just going to invert it. Right, so now it's just applying to the grapes, which is good. Oh, I forgot. I'm going to copy this mask. And then I'm going to go to structure because I was pretty sure that was applying here. And I'm going to paste this mask in. Okay, now it's just going to remove it from the leaves so that they're a little softer. Let's see what's happening here. We got a little bit of smart contrast. That looks nice. And I'm just going to dial that down a bit. Done some details. Landscape might work well here because we could enhance those leaves and then just shift them to a bit more yellow, like so. We could even add a sun ray here. So we've got some nice light coming through the leaves. If we add sun rays, I'm just going to make it sort of strong so that we can see where it is, and then place the center. So right now it's there. You want to make sure that when you add sun rays that it's coming from the right direction. So the light is from here, but let's play with it a bit more higher. I don't see any shadows, right? So it's fairly soft. Let's see what happens if we sort of bring it through this bit over here where the leaves are bright. And you'll notice that when I put it behind the stick, you notice that it's smart, right? So it doesn't actually glow from behind the stick. You know, it's hidden, right? Versus when I put it there, you see the full glow. Okay, so now let's move that over a little bit. One of the settings that I love in here is sort of this randomize one. Okay, so what I'll do is I'm going to just give us an overall look. Just slide the randomizer and just go until I see something I like. So I want it to be sort of hitting the grapes. Maybe I've got too many rays. Let's try more rays. We could try less rays. And I'm looking for it to hit the grapes, but maybe it's not in the right place. Oh, that's better. There we go. Now we're getting closer. Okay, so now let's see. Okay, so I'm liking what's happening there, and I'm just going to mask it. So I'm going to erase it off some bits that I don't want it on, like the grapes themselves. Okay, so I don't want it sort of flaring over the grapes. And I think I don't want it over here as well. So I just want it going from the sun sort of in. Let's see what that's doing. So see, it's just kind of adding a neat little effect. And it also, because of this overall look slider, which I love a lot, you can create a dark look or a light look. Okay. Don't they look sun-kissed now? And finally, my favorite one that I said I was going to come add, which is mystical. And I find that this one works really well on subjects like this, right? Now, if we don't want this, because it's adding sort of this soft blurry effect, if we don't want it on the grapes, remember we've got that mask already copied. And you can see that it's on the grapes now. Invert it. Now it's on the leaves, right? So now it's only blurring the edges, basically. Okay. I'm going to give the grapes maybe a 50% blur. Okay. So mask like so. Something very different. All right. So I'm going to head back to, let's play with one more thing. Let's play with the mood, right? So this one to me, mood is applying what's called a LUT. So that's a lookup table, and it's a stylized color. I'm going to dial it up to 50% here. And then I'm just going to scroll through the built-in ones because it's a stylized look. And often if you're not sure what you want to do with your image, this can give you a really cool idea. This first couple, this one here, to me, I really like the cool sort of feel of that. Right. Let's just see if anything else grabs my fancy. That's kind of neat. Ooh, that's actually really neat. Let's go with this one, right? And you can see as you increase the amount, it's giving you more of that effect, right? So I don't want it quite so severe, but I do like what it's doing to the grapes for sure, and what it's doing on those leaves. So it's really giving us focus on the grapes a bit more. Let's see what it's doing. See that? Almost like an antique look, and everything else is sort of fading out. Right? Again, if we don't want it to apply to the grapes as much, we can just say, okay, let's remove a little bit of that from the grapes so they stand out a bit more. And like so. There's infinite number of things you could do with an image like this because it's got so many artistic creativity possibilities, right? So you could play with color and black and white. You could play with these lookup tables or LUTs. You could add a split tone. Ooh, there was one in here that I saw. Ooh, that's kind of neat. Red trace, that's kind of neat. Ooh, sepia as well. So I really love these LUTs, and I actually use them quite often, right? So sepia is kind of neat too, where it gives it sort of this antique look, right? But again, if we just dial it down, it's giving us a portion of that without going too far, right? Let's just apply this and hop back to Lightroom and see if there's any questions. So Stephanie, how are your grapes looking? quick question for everybody that's watching, or if you're watching this replay later, is how helpful are the links that we send you in the chat and put in the description of the video? Do you go and have a look at them and see what else you can learn in between Wednesdays? And just another reminder that we will be changing to Saturday once we hit the New Year's. So we're going to be doing a couple more of these. We'll probably do next week, which is the 22nd, and then you'll see us on the 29th, and then we're going to switch to Saturdays, right? But let us know if these links are helpful and if you check them out. Okay. I think everybody needs some coffee today, or they're sleeping, or they're just, everybody's really involved with what I'm doing and so fascinated that you're just gobsmacked, right? Is that it? So I hope that you're learning something. A lot of times, like I said, with an image like this, I just play around until I get something that feels right, okay? So technical stuff aside, I'm also going for feel. And we do not have Trish still, so I might hold her image because I told her I was going to work on this one of this garage, which is cool. So I want to wait till she's actually in attendance. We don't have Anne. We do have Ron. Okay, so Ron, we've got one of your images. Let me just mark these ones as done. Okay, so just so for your own reference, right? So I just coded these red by selecting them and hitting 6 on my keyboard. You can see it says set label to red. Just like you're adding like ratings on these images, they've all got 4. Okay, so 1 on your keyboard, 1 is 1 star, 2 is 2 stars, 3, 4, 5, okay, is stars. If you do 6, it's red, 7 is yellow, 8 is green, and 9 is blue. Okay, so that's color ratings or color labels in Lightroom. In Luminar, you can just do pick or unpick. So they don't have the number system and they don't have the color system. But what I use these for is different things. So for example, in this collection, which I'm in Lightroom, okay, it's just the images that I'm going to edit this week, and I mark them as red. So I know that those are the ones I've done, and I'll remove them from the to be edited file, from the to be edited collection, right? I can even show you that. So I'll just make sure I drag them over here to done, right? And then I know they're in the done collection. And then at the end of the day, I'll just delete them from this collection. Okay? So a little sorting for Lightroom tips there. All right, this is Ron's image. And I'm sure he's going to tell us where he photographed this, somewhere in Australia. Great, you're drinking coffee. I had mine much earlier today because 7 o'clock at night, I'm not going to be drinking coffee. However, I do have, Ron, you might want to have one of these with your coffee. I'm sorry I can't ship it to you. A lovely ginger snap cookie that my mom made for me. So hopefully your wife or somebody or yourself is a baker and you'll be making some Christmas cookies to enjoy with your coffee. And glad to hear that the links are helpful. So let's take a look at this image. I'd love to hear again where you photographed this, Ron, and what you did with it. Okay, so when you're photographing a situation like this where it looks like you're inside of a cave, so it could be anywhere you're inside, could be inside a building, a garage, anything, over an overhang, and you're shooting out into an area that has bright sun like this, okay, you're going to end up with a really high contrast situation. So this is what I talked about earlier in terms of HDR. So I'm going to share the link to the HDR webinar again. If you aren't already registered, I'm going to be talking about shooting in scenarios like this and processing. And I'm going to use Lightroom and Aurora HDR. So if you want to see how that is done, sign up for that webinar. Even if you can't attend, because I know it's going to be early morning in Europe. It should be okay for you in Australia because we're doing it at the same time as this webinar, I think an hour later, or as this live. So if you can't attend live, register anyways, and you'll get a link to the recording, okay? So when you're in a scenario like this, shooting is extremely difficult. And as you can see from the histogram, you've got lots of dark, lots of white, lots of light, and not much in the middle, okay? So ideally, if you want detail inside the cave, and outside the cave, you want to shoot bracketed images and then merge them together because the camera can't hold detail in both areas, right? So if I clip on or I click on the J key, you can see that it's clipping in the highlight area. So let's see if we can solve that. It's actually not too bad. So if I bring the highlights down, I can keep detail in the highlights, right? I think I'm going to bring this color balance down a little bit. And of course, our profile. Starting with neutral might give me a little bit less contrast. Landscape gives me more contrast. I'm going to go with neutral. Okay, so in this case, I'm choosing the profile that sort of gives me the most detail to start with. I don't know if you can see the difference, but if I change it back to standard, look at the detail. Here, let's zoom into about 50%. Okay, so look at the detail in the water compared to the roof of the cave when I go from this one. Okay, so the water just brightened up. Here, there's a bit more detail. That one's brighter. So I found this one kind of neutral, ironically, right? So I'm going to brighten the shadows. If you want to have detail inside, you can see that there is detail there, right? But I want to show you that when we come in closer, remember how I was talking about the noise, what happens when you increase the exposure, right? Because we've cranked up the shadows, look at the noise inside the cave, okay? So even though this was shot at ISO 100, you're getting a lot of noise inside the cave, and we've got some chromatic aberration. Not so much noise outside. And that's because I'm pushing this exposure inside here, right? Look at the noise. I'm pushing that to the extreme, right? So you have to be careful of this. And that's the reason why to do HDR, okay? So even though your raw file will hold this kind of data in some cases, you're going to end up with lack of image quality versus doing this as an HDR. Okay? While we're in here, let's go and deal with these lens correction here. Okay, so always look on the edges of your images and the edges of where you see like a dark to light. Okay, so where there's a dark object and a light object, right? Like the corner of this cave here, that's where you're going to see chromatic aberration. Okay, so again, it's just a tick box, and I have that in my develop presets, import presets for Lightroom. So if you know that this particular lens, whichever lens it is, 16 to 300, okay, so when you're using it at the wide end in particular, you could actually have Lightroom apply the correction, including the lens profile, right when you import. So you don't have to go and do any of these things later, and it's just a quick shortcut, okay? So look at the difference that made. And we can see if there's any fringing. There's a tiny bit, you can see the tiny bit of purple there. Okay, so it did a little bit of reduction. That looks better, right? And you'll notice that when I turn this off, okay, now it's doing the profile as well. Let me just turn that profile off for a second here. Because I want to show you what it's doing in terms of, see how it's actually sharpening the image? So when I remove the chromatic aberration, it's doing the job of sharpening all the colors at the same point now, okay? All right, so let's make sure we have some nice blacks, right? So if you push up your shadows real high, remember to add and compensate by putting some blacks back, right? But we're gonna leave the shadows so there's just a hint of detail in the cave and not go too far because we want to not go too noisy, remember? And the new Lightroom masking could help us with that as well, because we can actually now target the noise reduction to just that outside area. On that note, let's see what Lightroom does if I choose sky. So it's going to see, I want to see if it picks up the water as well. Fingers crossed. Nope. Okay, so it just did the sky. I'm going to undo. And I'm going to see what it chooses for subject. Okay, now here we might get the cave, right? Because what Lightroom is looking for is stuff that's sharp. Okay, yay, we got the whole inside. Okay, perfect. That's exactly what I wanted. All right, so we're going to actually dial the highlights down even more, right? And I'm going to dehaze it a little bit because it looks like a little kind of rainy. Yeah, so there's not a lot of detail here on the water. And even if I darken it, you can see that it's not clipping. But when you have lack of detail, when it's clipping that much like that off the original graph, even on a raw file, you're never going to get any detail. It will be not pure white, but you'll never get the ripples of the water back. So again, if you had, say, 3 or 4 or 5 bracketed exposures, that's when you would get detail in the water and in the cave as well. Okay. I'm going to add an edge vignette on here just to add the darkness back to the edges of the cave. And let's do that. All right, perfect. So now we can increase the overall exposure a little bit. Okay. Like so. You can see it's doing a lens correction as well. And if we do the same, create another mask and select the subject, but then we're going to invert it. Okay, so once it selects that same area, now we can invert it and work on the cave. And this is where we can do the noise reduction and not worry about, okay, see our noise reduction here, and not worry about having it affect the sky as much. Right? But when you do noise reduction, you also want to add a little bit of sharpness because it sort of blurs everything. So let's see what that's doing. Maybe a little more sharper, a little sharper, a little sharper, and maybe a little bit of clarity. Okay. So that's how you can really affect different areas of the image and blend that in nicely. As well, you can see there's a little bit of what's called a halo around the outside here. Okay, so when you're doing HDR, especially, you want to look for like a fringe of light. Okay, so you can see that it's got sort of almost this angelic glow around the cave. So you want to make sure you don't go overboard and that you see too much of a halo, which is an indicator of over processing. Right. Rob is saying when I zoom in and out, the spot doesn't move. What do you mean by that, Rob? The spot doesn't move. So when I zoom in and out, I'm clicking on the image, right? So wherever I click, it zooms into that point. I'm not sure if that's what you meant or not. The other thing when you're doing framing like an image like this, for example, is you've got something in the middle here to grab our attention. It would be great if there was a boat or even a person walking here on the beach in the water or something like that. So if you have a companion, you can get them to walk across the beach. If you're doing a long exposure, they could even be kind of ghosted, which might be interesting, right? So you've got lots of cool things to do there. Is that helpful, Ron? You could also go a totally different way with this image and do a full silhouette. So if I just reset it, we could actually make it cooler and then go the other way and say, okay, look, I just want dark. I'm going to darken the whole thing. And so the cave is really sort of secondary and go something like that. Okay, so that's a very different look and feel than the first one, right? Which one? Let's hear it in the vote. Let's hear a vote. Who prefers the left image and who prefers the right image of Ron's cave? Hopefully you didn't encounter any sea monsters in the cave. Obviously you got back with life and limbs, so that's good. All right. Which do you prefer, Rob and Ron? Since you guys seem to be buddies, are you talking about any rock stars and bands this week? Linton, left or right? Which one does everybody like? Rob is left. Linton is left. Left. You had trouble with this one. It's a tricky one for sure. Right. See if you can replicate some of these things that I've done wrong. I might tend to agree with you, Deb. I kind of like the more silhouette version myself. My eye goes more directly into the middle, right? Interesting. All the men like the left and the women like the right. Does that mean we are in our right minds, ladies? Sorry, I couldn't resist. Okay, so now I'm going to mark those as red because I've done them. And let's see if we can do a couple more today. I was hoping Anne was going to be here, or AJ. Let's work on this one from Chris. Now, let me see. I don't know if Chris is not here, but I want to see what she's using. Luminar. Okay, perfect. Because I wanted to pull this one into Luminar, and I'm not sure if Chris is a he or she, but I'm guessing based on the spelling. So we'll just say Chris. Okay, so not sure what Chris prefers. So I'm going to do some basic edits here in Lightroom, including choosing a profile. And this one was done with a Nikon, so there's lots of different profiles. You'll see that the landscape one goes really contrasty and vivid, and I actually really like that. It gives it a lot more punch. It's very blue, right? But some of those things we can compensate for. I think standard is actually a nice in between. It's not quite as punchy as landscape, because remember, we're going to be adding some contrast when I do these sliders, right? So I'm going to check white. You'll notice that the sun itself, or that little bit there, is clipping, so I'm not going to worry about it, okay? And I'm going to clip a little bit of black. And in fact, I might even go a little farther with the whites and then bring the highlights back down. Right? Let's warm up the image. So with the color tone here, right, we can try to choose one of the other presets. We can look at daylight, cloudy. So cloudy is going to give it more warm. Shade is going to give it even a warmer tone, right? If we go tungsten, that's going to be the opposite. That's too blue. So somewhere in the daylight range, you get to decide, is the sunset like this or is it like this, right? I kind of like this one bluer, and I'm going to make it not quite as blue. We'll bring that up a little bit, and we can even bring up the pink, okay? So we can go more magenta like that. I kind of like the pink look. Find a balance. So what I'm doing here is I'm not grabbing the slider. You'll notice that my mouse is not on the slider. It's actually on the number itself. Okay, so when you put your mouse over the number and you click and you drag, can you see? So I'm not clicking on it to get the number, but if I just hover over the number, can you see there's a little hand and a little arrow that looks like this? Okay, so when I put it there, it's got a finger with two arrows. Okay. And when I click just sort of above the number and drag, it drags the slider, but slower. Can you see that? So I kind of like that color. So what that's called is a scrubby slider, right? And it allows you to just move it in smaller increments than grabbing the actual slider itself, right? I'm going to add a bit of clarity and a bit of texture. Now we get to play with, I'm going to do this image two different ways. So I'm going to do this one from here in Lightroom, and then we'll do it in Luminar. I like doing this comparison just to see how it goes. We're going to do select sky. Okay, and it did indeed select the sky. Okay, so that's perfect. I am going to bring the highlights down a little bit more. And I'm really going to punch up the texture so I get those clouds. See what's happening there? Really punch the texture and the clarity. Okay. Remember, if I increase shadows, that's the darkest areas. Okay, so I can bring that up a little bit. It looks like it's raining off to the horizon, and exposure is midtones. So if I want those clouds to be brighter, I need exposure higher, okay? And highlights lower. Let's see what that's doing. Bringing out the clouds nicely. Okay, so let's do another one, but I'm going to crop it first. Okay, so let's open the crop tool. I'm using the keyboard shortcut R. I'm going to click auto to see if it corrects the horizon. It looks more crooked than not. Didn't do a perfect job of that, so I'm going to use the ruler tool. So click the ruler, drag it all the way across. There we go. Okay, so that's straight. Now I want to drag up from the bottom. Okay, so the horizon is sort of on that third, which is good, but there's almost three things happening in this image. There's sky, there's water, and then there's the beach. And then there's bits in the foreground that are kind of rocky, and I don't really need them as part of the story. So I'm literally just going to bring it up, okay? Like so. See how the foreground is cleaner now, and we've got just the smooth beach and the rocks, right? We can also play with the HSL and see about getting some more color in this sky or darkening the sky. That does a great job. Try the oranges as well. Okay. Make sure you don't do stuff like that. Okay, so you want it subtle. Always do small adjustments. Go farther, see what it does, but then come back to make sure that you're not going too far. Okay? Yeah, I don't want to do too much because it's like creating a darkness around the sun that wouldn't be there, right? Okay, now you see the challenge of HSL in Lightroom. I want to darken this part of the sky, but not the clouds over here. And when I'm using HSL in Lightroom, I don't have the ability to mask it. Okay, so it's going to apply to the whole image. And if I try and do a mask of any kind, you'll notice that HSL is not one of the options that I have for the masking tools. Okay, so that's one advantage that Luminar has because you can mask that tool. Let's see. I would probably add just a little sharpness. I don't think we need noise reduction. I'm going to do landscape sharpness on this one. And that looks pretty good, right? That's about all I'm going to do. I'm going to go back to the other one that where I left off. I'm going to copy the cropping though. Actually, no, I'm not. Let's take it to Luminar. I want to see how Luminar crops it. I'm going to leave it as a TIFF just so I have a bit more color to work with. Good idea, Ron. Like, come and attend the HDR seminar if you haven't already registered, because I'm going to talk about bracketing and how to do it the quote right way. Okay, because I don't always use the bracketing on the camera. Sometimes I do it manually. Right? Possibly. I always say that I'm in my right brain, which is the artistic brain, because I'm left-handed. So, because you're like opposite. All right, Luminar. Let's see. Let's see about which ones it suggests in terms of templates. But I have an idea of what I want to do with this image anyways. That's very different. Ooh, that's very different indeed. So some very different styles that I hadn't thought about for this image, but what do you think? I kind of like that, actually. It's very, very rich, as it said. But you can dial back the overall effect just by using the slider at the bottom. So I think I'll do that and apply it somewhere about there, which looks like about 75%-ish. And then I'm going to go in and crop. Okay, so let's see what Lightroom or Luminar. I'm getting my words mixed up because my tongue doesn't work very well. Right, let's see what it does for correcting this tilt. Okay, that's not bad. And then composition, let's see what it suggests. Okay, so it did suggest cropping in, which is what I did. And I'm just going to go free composition because I'm going to keep a little more from the side and a little more from the top. Okay, but you'll notice that it did suggest cropping off this bottom bit, which I did. Okay. Actually, I don't know about cropping in. That's not a bad idea either because now my sun is a little bit closer to that third as well. So Luminar did a good job in choosing the crop. If I want to go through now one by one, each of these tools is telling me with this little dot that it's had something applied. Okay. One that I was considering for this image was sun rays. Okay, so the sun rays that I put on the other one, you know, it was kind of because it was fun. This one might work really well because the sun is actually in the picture. And I could put it behind this little cloud there. Now you'll notice that I turn up the amount really high. And I do that partly because I just want to see where it's going, right? And then I'm going to turn the amount down and play with these other things here. Okay, so let's make it a little bit warmer. Maybe a little bit less glow because there's lots of glow on the sun itself. Right? That's just affecting the middle portion, right? So it looks like it's coming out from behind those clouds. Can you see that? And then I'm going to play with my favorite, which is the randomize. I think there's way too many rays, so let's do a bunch less. Okay, so that kind of is nice. Like I want it to come across the water here where it's actually hitting, and it's doing a nice job there, right? So the overall look, lighter or more contrasty or darker, and then I can just dial back the sun rays themselves a bit. So see how this one really fits in here with this image, right? You'll notice that it's applied enhance and sky enhancer, and I could take that farther, and it's kind of like putting the polarizing filter on the sky, right? See that? Brilliant. Now I'll show you what I mean by the color tools, right? So it's dialed the vibrance down a bit. Actually, I might want to bring that up a little. And let's see what it's done in terms of density. So it hasn't. Okay, so this is what I mean by adjusting. Like if I want to darken the blue at the top of the sky, okay, might be some purple as well. Okay, see orange right around the sunset there, red at the bottom. Okay, so right now it's affecting the whole image, right? But if I only want it to apply to the top of the image, right, I can do this. And if I don't want it to apply to these clouds, right, make sure that's clipped out. So now it's only affecting that top part. Okay. So off, on. Looks like I've lowered the saturation of the blue a bit, so I'm going to put that back. Okay. The other cool thing about Luminar is that if I want to do another one, I can add a basic adjustment, and I can do more of the basic adjustments. For example, I could increase the color and then mask it if I want to warm it up and increase the exposure. But I only want to do that on the very bottom part of the image because I want more of those reds to come in. Okay. See what that's doing? It got a little dark at the bottom, so I'm just lightening it up a little bit. Okay, so it's kind of like a filter on the edge. Well, that really punched that up, I have to say. It looks like a really blue sunset. Maybe warm it up a little bit too. Now notice that as I increase the yellow, the blue that I added to the image kind of disappears. So again, we have a choice. More yellow or more blue. I think that looks absolutely fabulous. Really nice. More blue. Totally preference. I'm going to give it a little bit of blue. Excellent. Any questions? I found that Luminar does a better job of inspiration, right? If you don't know what to do with your image, if you have Luminar and Lightroom and you're stuck in Lightroom, take it to Luminar and just play around with some of the templates, especially the ones that it suggests for you, and see what you come up with. Because I wasn't going to apply this dark of a look to this image. We could have applied the mystical as well. But look at the difference between the two images. Let's see them side by side here. Oops, is that the one I edited? Let's see, which one did I actually edit? There we go. That's the one I edited. Okay, so the left one is Lightroom, and the right one is Luminar. In this case, I definitely think the Luminar one looks better. Right? Let's do one more image for today, I think. Let's see. AJ's not here today, so I'm going to leave that one. Anne's not here. Let's play with this one in Lightroom. Okay, now this is a JPEG, so I may be limited in terms of what detail is in the image, right? But I'm going to see, we won't get color profiles either. I'm just going to see what I can do with the new masking tools in terms of bringing out some texture in this fur. So this is an image, again, that was by my tutoring student, Regan. And she's got horses on her property, and her kids love working with the horses. I love watching her pictures because the kids have horses and ducks and dogs and all kinds of wonderful things. So what I'm doing with the basic sliders here, right, is I've done black to the left, so I've got a little bit of clipping. I've done highlights to the left, so I don't have any clipping in the whites, right? And I can bring up the shadows a little bit so that we can see a bit more detail in his fur, okay? So this is overall. So remember, everything I'm doing here is a global edit, applies to the entire image, okay? So we want to make sure to bring out his face more and sort of minimize this grass. So let's take a look at how we can do that. So I'll give it a little bit of clarity. And I'm going to try HSL first and see if I click on the grass and adjust the tones. Okay, so it's yellow and green. Okay, that's working pretty well. But you see it's not getting the total highlights, right? It's missing the top highlights there. Yeah, and if orange, orange did nice to bring out the horse's mane. Look at that. So I can bring up his mane a little bit. That worked well. Red, not really much red in the picture. So that's about all I can do with this one in terms of darkening the grass. Let's see what I get when I choose subject. Okay, we got the horse. Now we've got the whole horse, but what I'm going to do is I want to intersect this one. Okay, so intersect is different than add and subtract. So I want just his head, right? Because the body and from sort of the mane backwards is out of focus. It's blurry. So I don't want to add contrast or texture there because it's going to look, I don't want to draw attention to it. I want to draw attention to his face. Okay, so I could do subtract and do a graduated filter. So I'm going to do this a couple of different ways to show you how to approach it. So I'm going to do subtract, linear gradient, and then just do something like that. Okay, so now it's going to fade off away from his head, which works well. Okay, I'm just going to undo that. I could do subtract, radial gradient, and then draw an oval. Right. Let's make it not quite so faded, and then just position it how best I can get less of his body. Okay, so that's not bad either. Okay. Oops. Undo. Or I could do subtract, color range, but if I try to color range, it's going to get his face too. So I think the best one that worked the best was actually the linear gradient. And I don't want to gradate it too far because I want to make sure to get his mane all sharp. So it's going to kind of fade out. So that worked well. Now I'm going to add a bunch of texture, a little bit more clarity. And this is where we can get creative with increasing the exposure. And when I was talking to you about if you have, for example, a backlit subject where you want to add more detail. So look what happens when I just do exposure. It starts to look really flat. Okay, so if you want to have more brightness on your subject, make sure you do a little bit of exposure, a little bit of whites, and then a little bit of blacks. Okay, so it maintains that contrast. And you see the difference? We can go a little more with the exposure. Right? But let me turn this guy off and you'll see the difference. Okay? So it's by adding the whites as well, it's increasing the mane and all the highlights down the side of his face. Okay? Now I want to deal with this haystack down here. So I'm going to make a new mask. And again, I want to figure out, using these tools, how can I best use them to select just the hay and not the horse? So I'm going to attack this one using a linear gradient to get the hay. Okay, but now you notice that I've got his face too. I don't want his face, okay? But I know that when I did select subject, his face was in the subject matter, right? So I'm just going to go subtract subject, Okay, so I want everything that was in the linear gradient minus the subject, and it took out his face. Okay, you see that? When you do intersect, for example, intersect is, so minus or subtract is this but not this. Okay, so it's the linear gradient but not the subject in that same area. Okay, add is the linear gradient plus, so this plus this. Okay, and when you do intersect, it's this and this, so not plus. It has to meet both criteria. Okay, I'll do an example of that one just to show you, but let me adjust this one here. So I want to darken this whole hay area now. Okay, and that's way better. I'm also going to bring the texture down in it a little bit and the clarity so that it's not taking so much attention away from our pony. Okay. Does anybody want to see intersect again? So I'm just going to do, let's say I want to do the mane, for example. Okay, so I'm going to go create subject. And let's say I just want his mane, okay, the lightest parts. So what I'm going to do is on the top layer where it says mask, there's these little 3 dots. I'm going to do intersect with, and I'm going to choose luminance range. So when I draw over the mane here, I'm just going to click a little square, right? So what it's done is everything that was that tone inside of the subject has now been selected. Okay, so then I could do whatever I want with that. If I want to make it more yellow, okay, I can add some color to it because his mane was looking kind of white, so I've just added some color. Actually, I can do that with the color adjustment down here, this little X. So I'm going to pick sort of an orangey yellow color. See how that's adding color? Right? Because we've lost the highlight, so I can just put a little bit of color back into his fur. So that's intersect. Right? And finally, I'm going to do just an edge vignette again. I'm going to use maybe low or medium to bring our attention to our pony. And I'm going to straighten it just a tiny bit. Maybe even crop in a little tighter. There we go. Any questions about that? Everybody's very quiet today, preparing for holidays, I hope. Pretty cold around here, so we're mostly just staying indoors. Rob says he'd like you to go to the community tab. Is there a way for you to link to that, Rob? Let me go over here. So when you go to our YouTube channel, let me see if I can pull it up on the screen so you can see what it looks like. When you go to our channel, there should be a community tab. Oops. So let me just bring this over to my other screen. Okay, now you should be able to see my browser, right? So when you get to the channel, there's videos, playlists, and so on. And then there is also community. So when you go to community, Rob has got a poll right here, and he wants to know what day you want. Okay, so or what time. So if you could please vote on a time on our channel, and that's on the community tab. Yeah, there is a link to it. So I think he probably posted that already. Let me give you the link here. Go to the community tab and just vote for which time of day is going to be the best for you. I know that we're probably going to lose some of our Australians for a while, but you all are going into summer, so you could probably be outside shooting and catch up with us when we have some webinars in the evening our time. So not to worry, we'll still have some events for you all to attend, and we don't want to leave you out, but we want to make sure our European friends can join us as well. Okay. So just a reminder again to please submit your photos. And I think we're going to end with this one today, and because we're running out of time, and I'm hungry. So I want to thank everybody for joining today. I'll stick around for a few minutes if you have any additional questions. And reminder to please subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. And those of you that are joining every week, we really appreciate you. We love seeing you. Oh, I did want to share this with everybody today because I am off to a birthday party tomorrow, and I made this for some ladies that I photographed in September. I'm getting some glare. I'll try to do that. And what I might do is I made this little design. I made this little layout in Lightroom. So what I might do next week is show you how to make that kind of layout and export a JPEG so you can print it right from Lightroom. You don't need to do Photoshop to make the designs. And we'll see you one more time before Christmas next week. Let's see. Oh, Chris just joined us. Yes, you did miss your photo. I did edit your photo. Do you want me to put it back on the screen, Chris? Let's do that. I did edit your photo, Chris. So let's have a look at what I did. So this was the original photo, right? I cropped it a little bit as well. I'll just do a reset. So that was the original photo. Let me move these around. Oh, bigger. He says bigger. There we go. This was the original photo. That is the Lightroom edit that I did. A little bit of cropping. And the Luminar edit. Very dramatic. So if you want to see how I did that, just watch the replay, Chris. As soon as I end the broadcast, you'll be able to see the replay on how I did that. Oops. Sorry, I was muted and Rob's yelling at me to unmute. It's fun around here because I have a cat sleeping in the chair next to me, and I was hoping the whole time she wasn't going to walk across my desk, and Rob shouting at me from his man cave in the basement. So thanks for tuning in, everybody. We'll see you again next week. Take care.